Hi, it's Alison from Blue Cat Sewing. Today I'm going to show you how to make a coin purse. This is the pattern that I've done that you can download from my Etsy shop with all the pattern pieces and all the photographs. And this is the one that I show you how to make in the instructions. But I thought I'd show you how to make a denim one. They make great gifts. And if you're new to sewing zips, it's a really good way of practicing. And this is a bit of old denim that I've got left over. So I thought I'd try and use this pocket piece, which isn't really a pocket, it's just a mock pocket, and some of the other little features that are included in the denim. I'll pop the link just here so that you can download the pattern, but here's the tutorial to take you through it. You get two styles of purse included in the pattern, and I'm going to be doing the wide opening one. So I've got the two pattern pieces and I've got the pocket piece, and the next thing I need to do is to make some bias tape. So I need a 45-degree angle on my lining piece because this is the stretchiest part of the fabric. And then I cut a strip down there in order to make my tape in a moment. But first I'm going to look at the jeans that I've got that I want to work with. As you can see, it's quite stretchy. Yours may not be as stretchy as this, but I would still recommend using some fusible interfacing to give it a bit of stability. Just some fine stuff, the finest that you can find really. This is what I'm going to use. You can see how fine it is and it's fusible. That's really important. Now this is a part that I always spend ages doing. I need to work out where to put the purse pattern. So I'm going to avoid that rivet there. So I don't want that anywhere near any seams, because if that gets caught under the needle, it's just going to be a nightmare. So it's going to be quite in the middle. And then I'm going to cut around that area in order to fuse the interfacing on and also just make sure that I've got enough space to move the pattern piece around. And then the back of the purse, I'm going to use a simpler design. So I'm just going to have the seam of the jeans right in the middle. So that's going to go there. So I'm going to cut loosely around that as well, so I've got space to do my interfacing and then cut the pattern piece out afterwards. You'll see that there are some tiny stitch marks, little pinholes where the needle has gone through, but don't worry too much about things like that because we're fusing the denim. It will be secure. These tiny little holes won't matter. So give everything a really good press. Make sure that any seams that are sticking up are pressed down flat, and then place the denim on top of the interfacing. Make sure that you've got the side of the interfacing that is fusible facing upwards so that the denim will meet that. And then just give it a trim around so that it's not sticking out beyond the denim, because when we get the iron out in a moment, we do not want the iron to stick to the interfacing because that would be a nightmare. You'd have to do lots of work to your iron to get the stickiness off. So now we can press that. It takes a little bit of sticking. Try to keep the iron away from the interfacing if you possibly can. Now I'm trimming that bit away. Now that I've got part of it stuck down, I'm going to trim away the rest so that I can give it a really good press. Going along with the instructions that you've got printed out from Etsy, you'll see that I actually cut the interfacing out as a pattern piece and then fuse it to the fabric. But when you're doing denim, I just find it easier to do it this way. And also with using such a fine interfacing, it's a lot easier to do it this way. Hold the iron on there as long as you dare, but obviously you don't want to burn through with the iron. In a moment, we're going to turn the whole thing over and press from the other side. But we're going to use a pressing cloth to do that so that we don't have the iron sticking onto the interfacing. There we go. This is just a bit of old cloth, a bit of old sheeting that I always use as a pressing cloth. So you can hold the iron for quite a bit of time here and just get it sticking really well. And now I've drawn on the pattern with a pen and cut it out. So as you can see, those little marks where the belt loop was and the waistband, they won't really matter because we've interfaced it, it will give it some security. And it's quite important, I think, when you are deciding where to put your pattern pieces to not have a seam on the back, in the same place as you've got any seams on the front. Just makes it really bulky where seams are and zips are if you've got all these joins meeting in the same place. So now we're on to doing the bias tape. So just fold it in half and press it, and then open it out and fold it in half again so that all of the raw edges are in the middle, and then fold it again. And then we're going to stitch all the way down here to join it all together. Now, while I've got my orange thread in the sewing machine, I'm going to do all my orange stitching. So I'm going to do the little hem at the top of the pocket, fold that down, just a narrow hem. It doesn't really matter how big. I wanted to show you this denim waistband that I took off, took all the stitching out, and I was looking at it thinking that would make a really good front to the purse. So that's what I did. You'll see that purse at the end. I used the wide base and made it into a purse, and I think it looks really good with all the fading and all the crinkles where the stitches are. So I'll show you that at the end. As I say in the instructions, when you're sewing something so narrow, your machine inevitably wants to chew the whole thing up, and it makes it really difficult. So if you get a scrap piece of fabric and start stitching on that, and then continue with your stitching onto the bias tape, it just seems to work. It gives it a bit of stability. So this little scrap piece of fabric they call a leader. It just leads on to doing something really narrow, makes it a lot easier. And when you're finished sewing that, you can just cut the leader off. And now we're going to move on to doing the hem on the top of the pocket. So just one line of stitching along there, and that will be done. And then place the pocket on top of one of the lining pieces and pin around. Make sure that the edges at the bottom are all lined up. And then sew down each side of the pocket and along the bottom, making sure that you do a reverse stitch at the beginning and the end. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to get going for some reason, so I had to lift the foot up. Keep your needle in the machine. If you're lifting the foot up at any point, then your stitches won't move. And finally, we're on to the zip. So open up the zip and place it right side down on top of one of the main pieces. And then place the lining piece, it doesn't matter which one, it could be the one with the pocket or not, and just line all of those edges up along the top and pop some pins in. You'll notice that my zip is a lot longer than it needed to be, but this is the one that I had in. And as long as it's not shorter than it needs to be, then you'll be fine, because we'll be cutting off the end at when we finished sewing it. Now we need to get a needle and thread and stitch along here. It's going to be an awful lot easier if we tack or baste this rather than just trying to do it with the pins, because the lining fabric, when you get it underneath the sewing machine, it tends to want to move. So put some stitches in here to hold everything together, all of those layers, and it'll be much easier when it comes to machining. At this point, you're going to need to find your zipper foot for your machine. This is what mine looks like, and this is how I take the feet off my machine and put the new one on. Yours may be different though, so check in your instructions how to do this. There's a little red button at the back of mine that just pops the feet off. Don't forget to do a reverse stitch at the beginning and at the end as well. And take your time along here and smooth out the fabric as you go. You'll see that I stop every now and then, keep my needle in the machine and lift the foot up just to check that everything's okay and I haven't got any tucks or anything, because you do have a tendency to get tucks when you're sewing on the lining. You don't need to stitch too far in from the edge. The closer that you get to the zipper teeth with your stitching, the more likely you are to get the teeth caught in the fabric and in the stitches when you're opening and closing the zip. And then we just need to take out the hand stitches that we did before. You'll see here there's a little tuck that I'm a little bit worried about, but I've decided to go ahead and just press it, and it was fine in the end. But there have been occasions where I've unpicked that area and just restitched it. So press the whole thing open quite close to the zip and then fold it over and press again. It could be a little bit bulky along here, so give it a good press. The more pressing that you do, the better it is in the end, because you don't want your zip getting caught in the fabric when you're opening and closing it when you're using the purse. And then place the remaining zip tape on top of the lining and place the other side of the denim on top of that and pin those layers together just as you did before. So I've tacked that and I'm going to sew along here. Usually find it's a bit easier on this side because we've got the interfacing, which is making the fabric a little bit more stable. But even so, take your time and try and make sure you've not got any tucks. And yes, that looks like a little tuck that I've got there, but that's just going to press out, thankfully. So press as you did before, press it open close to the zip tape, and then fold it over and press again close to the zip tape. Then close your zip about halfway just to keep the zip pull out of the way while you're sewing, and then open it all out so that the right sides of your lining are together and the right sides of your denim are together. Place some pins where the pocket is basically on the lining, because the gap in the middle, we won't be sewing there. That will mark the point where you finish and end your stitches. Now it's very important to have all of your turnings on the front and the back of the purse going in the same direction. And what I do is I make sure that the zip tape lies flat against the main fabric and the lining, the orange fabric in my case, stands up and the denim is tucked underneath. You need to give the zip a little bit of a squeeze because that is all pushed together, and then try and pop some pins in, but it's not easy because there's a lot of bulk there. But just make sure that you know front and back that all of your seams are going in the same direction, and that when you are sewing on your machine, you know which way that you want those seams to go. And place some pins wherever you can. And then we're going to start sewing at one of those pins on the lining next to the gap. Everything is going in the right direction. And then I like to draw a line, a stitching line, which is 1/4 of an inch along the denim. It doesn't matter so much about on the lining, but I like to make sure that I've got a good stitch line here to follow, and use the pattern piece, the paper pattern piece that you've cut out. Use that as a guide in order to get a nice curve with your pen. It will make life a lot easier when you are sewing at your machine. So we're going to start sewing at that first pin on the lining and then go all the way around till we get to the final pin. It's a little bit hard going around the curves, so you need to do this slowly and go slowly when you get to the bulky areas, especially the zip. You'll see I take all the pins out here. There's too much bulk to go round, and just go slowly. Take your pins out as you go and follow the stitch line. Check carefully when you get to this point that the back of the purse, that the lining is going upwards. All your turnings should be going in the same direction. And you can see how slowly I'm going here at this point. And when you get to the final pin, do a reverse stitch and then check all over that you're happy with it, that everything is going in the right direction. And then all we need to do is trim all the way around. You don't need to take too much off, and you don't need to snip into the corners or anything like that because it's just a curve. So you should have a nice finish at the end. Don't trim where the gap is because you'll need those turnings just to turn it all through and finish it off. So we're going to turn those turnings back and press them down, which will make it easier to close that gap at the end. And now we're on to the best bit, turning everything through. When you get to where the zip is, you'll find it's a little bit tricky because there's not much of a gap, especially if you've pulled the zip over a bit too far. So just get your fingers in there and try and move the zip open a little bit more. It'll make it a lot easier to get everything pulled through. There, isn't that looking good already? Push your fingers into all the corners to try and get a nice edge, and then we're going to close the gap and we're nearly there. Get your fingers right into that point where the zip pull is because it tends to want to get tucked in. So just push it right out and you'll get a nice shape. Then give it a good press, both sides, and then we just need to close the gap. So push the turnings in and place a pin there, and then just use your sewing machine to sew across that edge, just like that. And then push everything through, and that's it. You can press from the inside as well if you want to make sure that it's definitely going to not get stuck when you open and close the zip. You don't want fabric to get caught. But that's it, you've done. The only thing we haven't done is put the zip pull on. You don't have to do this, but I think it gives it a nice touch. So just push it through and place a few stitches either by hand or on the machine to hold it in place. Keep watching to see that purse at the end that I told you I was going to make. But in the meantime, don't forget to give me a like and a subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. So here's this purse that we've made with the pocket inside. I think it looks rather good with the bright orange lining. And here's the one that I made from the waistband, also with a pocket and orange lining. Which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comments.